On a Tuesday afternoon in March, I was at my desk in Seattle finishing a budget review when my phone started buzzing. Then again. Then it didn't stop. By the time I set down my coffee, I had 39 missed calls from Ohio area codes. Numbers I hadn't seen in 7 years. Numbers I had never deleted because deleting them would have felt like a reaction. And I had spent 7 years learning not to react to my family. I went to my office, closed the door, and listened to every single voicemail, 39 of them. Different voices, different tones, different levels of desperation, but every single one carried exactly the same two words. Help me. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I missed you. Just help me. Handed to me across 7 years of silence like it was a reasonable opening offer. 7 years, and that was all they had. To understand what I did with those 39 voicemails, I need to take you back to a Thanksgiving dinner in a small town in Ohio, 7 years earlier, when a woman I had spent my whole life trying to love finally showed me, clearly and completely, who she was, and I believed her. My name is Nora Callahan. I am 30 years old. I am the Chief Operating Officer of a community development firm in Seattle. I have a master's degree, a home I own, and last fall, a regional business publication ran a 2-page profile on me with a headline that described me as one of the most influential voices in Pacific Northwest community development. Nobody in Claremont, Ohio, population 4,000, the kind of town where gossip travels faster than the mail, knew any of that. For 7 years, the only version of me that existed in that town was the one my mother, Diane Callahan, had carefully constructed and maintained. The troubled daughter. The one who snapped at Thanksgiving, abandoned her family, and ended up somewhere doing something nobody could quite name. A cautionary tale she carried like a handbag. Pretty enough for public. Useful for collecting sympathy. That version of me was about to have a very bad week. Before I tell you what I did with those 39 voicemails, I need to start where it actually started, and it started with a dinner table. And hey, if you're here right now, genuinely thank you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Hit like if this is connecting with you. It truly keeps me going. Thanksgiving at the Callahan house meant my mother's good china on the long table, 14 relatives packed elbow to elbow, and my father pouring wine like silence was something you could drown. I was 23. I was working 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner 5 nights a week and answering phones at a real estate office 3 mornings a week, and saving every dollar I could manage. My sister Paige had just been promoted to marketing coordinator at a regional insurance firm. New title, same salary. In our family, titles mattered more than substance. My mother stood at the head of the table and made a toast to Paige, the one who was always making the family proud. 14 people raised their glasses. I raised mine too. Nobody asked what I was doing. Nobody asked about my savings, my night classes, my plans. I was wallpaper in my own family's house, and I had been for as long as I could remember. I had come to that dinner with one question. I waited until dessert when the noise had settled and asked my mother whether there was anything left in my grandmother's education fund. Grandma Carol had told me herself, 2 years before she passed. She had sat me down at her kitchen table, held my hands, and told me she had set aside $12,000 for my future. Nobody could touch it but me. Somebody had touched it. The table went quiet the moment I asked. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that tells you a grenade just rolled under the chair and everyone saw it but you. My mother set her coffee cup down with the deliberate slowness of a woman preparing a performance. She looked at me, then at every person at that table, and when she spoke, her voice was sweet enough to cause a cavity. She said this was exactly what she had been dealing with, that I had been acting erratic for months. A murmur of sympathy moved around the table. My Aunt Roberta reached over and patted my hand, told me my mother just wanted what was best for me. I excused myself, went to the kitchen, and started washing dishes. That was what I always did at family gatherings. I cleaned while everyone else celebrated. 16 years of muscle memory. The faucet was running, but I could still hear my mother's voice through the doorway, low and careful, talking to my Aunt Janet. She was explaining that Grandma Carol's fund had gone to Paige's sorority dues and her car, that I didn't need it anyway, that I wasn't going anywhere. I turned the water off. I walked back to the dining room and told my mother directly that the money had been left to me by name and that she had no right to it. She didn't flinch. She folded her hands and tilted her head, the gesture she always used when she was about to rewrite reality in front of your face, and told me I was being dramatic, that I always made everything about money. Then she compared me to my grandmother, said I sounded just like Carol, always stirring things up. She said my grandmother's name like it was something to scrape off a shoe. 10 minutes later, she called everyone into the living room. I had seen this before. Different holiday, different trigger, same choreography. My mother in the center of the room, dabbing at the corner of her eye, telling a room full of relatives that she had been trying to keep this private, but that I hadn't been well. That she had been covering for me. I looked at my father. He was sitting in his recliner staring at the carpet. I looked at my brother Tyler. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He gave a small nod, not to me, to her. I looked at Paige. She was scrolling her phone. 14 people in that room. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them said that this seemed wrong. I went upstairs and packed a suitcase. $200 in tip money, a winter coat, and a small cedar box Grandma Carol had left me. The one I had kept on my dresser for 2 years without opening, because opening it meant admitting she was really gone. I walked down the stairs and through the living room. My mother's voice followed me all the way to the door, a warning that if I left, I should not come back. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly, because I already knew I would never open it again. Outside, snow was falling on Claremont, Ohio. I had a suitcase, $200, and nowhere to go. That was the last time I heard my mother's voice for 7 years. I bought a Greyhound ticket at the station on Route 40. The farthest I could get for what I had was Seattle, Washington. 36 hours on a bus with my suitcase between my knees and a cedar box on my lap. I didn't sleep. I watched America scroll past the window. Flat farmland, then mountains, then gray Pacific rain, and tried to remember the last time someone in my family had asked me a genuine question. Not a complaint dressed up as concern, an actual question. I couldn't find one. The woman in the seat beside me was traveling to Spokane to visit her grandchildren. Outside Billings, she offered me half a sandwich. I thanked her and ate it quickly. She didn't ask why I was crying. She just handed me a napkin and looked out the window. Sometimes a stranger gives you more grace in 10 seconds than your family manages in 23 years. Seattle in December. First night at a women's shelter near Capitol Hill. Second week in a hostel with communal kitchen rules posted on the wall, all of which I followed carefully because free is free. I had no credit history, no local connections, no references. What I had was a work ethic my family had spent 23 years exploiting and 0 years acknowledging. I found a job within 2 weeks, receptionist at a small nonprofit consulting firm called Westfield and Partners. 7 employees, a cramped office in a converted warehouse, a founder named Ellen Westfield who had built the company from scratch over 15 years. They helped communities apply for development grants. I answered phones and sorted mail. It wasn't glamorous. It was a paycheck, and a paycheck was everything. 3 weeks in, I made the mistake of checking social media. My mother had posted in the family group asking everyone to keep me in their prayers, saying she hoped I was safe wherever I was, that her door was always open. 104 reactions, all affirming what a strong, devoted mother she was. My brother Tyler's comment sat at the top, something about how I'd always been the dramatic one. 41 likes. I deleted the account that night and did not look back. I want to be honest about what 7 years of no contact actually costs when you're 23 with nothing. No health insurance, no emergency contact on any form, no one to call when you get sick enough to wonder whether you can afford an ambulance, and the thing nobody warns you about. The permanent low hum of knowing that somewhere in Ohio, 15 people are telling a story about you and you cannot correct a single word of it. But here is what the silence gave me in return. The first morning I woke up in Seattle, and truly woke up and not startled awake by anxiety, but actually rested. I lay in my hostel bunk and realized something was missing. It took me a full minute to identify what. My mother's voice, that internal narration that had run on a loop my entire life, the one that said I was not enough and never would be, had gone completely quiet. Like someone had finally found the off switch on a radio I had been hearing my whole life. At Westfield and Partners, Ellen noticed me before I noticed myself. I had reorganized the entire client filing system in my first week. 3 years of scattered folders, color coded and cross referenced. Nobody had asked me to. I simply couldn't stand the chaos. Ellen walked past my desk on a Friday, stopped, came back, and studied what I had done. She asked who did that, and then she pulled up a chair and asked what else I saw that was broken. That conversation was the beginning of everything. While I was filing grants in Seattle, my mother was filing her version of me in Claremont. Within a month of my leaving, she had told the women's ministry that I was receiving care at a residential facility. She never specified which one. In a small town, she didn't need to. People fill in the blank with whatever version is most dramatic. My father handled the neighbors with a practiced crack in his voice, saying he just hoped I was safe wherever I was. My brother posted vague, pointed things on social media, observations about loyalty and people who run instead of growing up. Each post earned dozens of likes. Each one was about me. So that was Claremont's version of Nora Callahan for 7 years, a troubled girl who had abandoned her family, a tragedy they could carry like a handbag, and not one of them in all that time thought to Google my name. Until my sister did. And when she did, everything changed. If you're still here, I need to say something directly to you. This story is about to turn. If it's landing somewhere real, please hit subscribe and leave me a comment. It genuinely means everything, and it keeps me going more than you know. Year 1 in Seattle was survival. Year 2 was the first time I made a plan that belonged entirely to me. At Westfield and Partners, I moved from reception to project coordination in 8 months. Ellen gave me a small grant application to manage, a community garden project on the south side of the city. I turned it in 3 days early with a revised budget that saved the client 9%. She read it twice, handed me a second project, and said nothing else. She communicated approval through work, which was exactly the language I understood best. I enrolled in the University of Washington's Business Administration program. Classes at night, work during the day, tuition paid out of every paycheck in small amounts, no loans. My apartment was a shared 2-bedroom in Beacon Hill with a roommate who worked nights, so we barely overlapped. I cooked every meal, bought clothes at thrift stores, and cut my own hair for 3 years. I want to be specific about what building yourself from zero actually looks like, because there is no montage. There are only alarm clocks and spreadsheets, and falling asleep with a textbook open at 1 in the morning and waking at 6 to do it again. I didn't have a plan to become successful. I had a plan to never feel powerless again. The success was a side effect. When I caught a billing error in a client account that would have cost the firm $8,000, Ellen promoted me to junior consultant and told me I checked things her accountant didn't. By year 6, Westfield and Partners had grown from 7 employees to 90. Ellen promoted me to Chief Operating Officer. A regional magazine ran a profile. My photo, my name, my title, my story, the clean version, starting as a receptionist and working up. My closest colleague, Rachel, had been with the firm 3 years by then. She was sharp and direct and had her own version of a family that had chosen a false story over the truth. We had bonded over takeout in my office one evening after a long deadline, and the bond had held ever since. She bought a cake when the magazine profile went live, one that said "Boss Moves" in blue frosting, which I found both embarrassing and entirely correct. 7 years after leaving Claremont, nobody in that town knew any of it. They were still living inside my mother's version of me, committed to it, so committed that not one of them had ever thought to check. Until a Tuesday afternoon when my sister Paige sat down at her kitchen table and for the first time in 7 years typed my name into a search engine. She was not looking for me. She was looking for money. Paige was 32, freshly divorced, 3 months behind on her mortgage, and running out of options. She needed a cosigner on a refinancing loan. My mother's credit was ruined. My father was on Social Security. My brother Tyler had significant student debt. Paige thought of me the way you think of a tool you threw in a drawer years ago, not with affection, but with sudden practical interest. My name pulled up a LinkedIn profile, a magazine feature, a company bio with a professional headshot, speaking credits, and a quote from Ellen describing me as the operational backbone of everything we've built. My Aunt Janet, who had been at that Thanksgiving and had watched everything and said nothing, told me later that Paige stared at the screen for a full minute without blinking. Then she called my mother. The sound on the other end of the line when Paige told her what she had found was not joy or pride or relief. It was a sharp inhale, the specific sound a person makes when the story they have been telling for 7 years catches fire in their hands and they realize too late that they are the one holding it. The calls started that evening. By the time I checked my phone after a quarterly review meeting, I had 39 missed calls from Ohio area codes, all within the same 24-hour window. I went to my office, closed the door, and listened to every single one. Paige's early voicemails were practiced and breezy, the tone of someone who expects no pushback. My father's messages were halting and uncomfortable, leaning on words like family and rough patch. My mother was clipped and controlled, as though she was doing me a favor by calling. Tyler, characteristically, worked in a pitch for money before he finished introducing himself. As the messages progressed, Paige's composure cracked and her later voicemails were stripped down to just the two words she actually meant: help me. 39 voicemails, 0 apologies. Every single one wanted the same thing. 3 days later, an email arrived at my work address. My mother informed me that after everything the family had done for me, I couldn't return a phone call. She said she had spent 7 years protecting my reputation, telling people I'd been getting help, defending me in a town that asked questions. She called me selfish, the same word she had used at every family gathering my entire life, deployed now with the confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether it was accurate. I saved the email and did not reply. A LinkedIn message from Paige followed, asking for the loan cosign in the same tone she had used to ask for borrowed sweaters growing up, as though the answer was already yes and the asking was a formality. Tyler posted on Facebook, publicly, tagging extended family, calling me ungrateful and declaring that family had supported me my whole life, and I was now too good to answer my phone. 41 likes. I screenshotted all of it, not for legal reasons, for myself, for the mornings when I might wake up and wonder if I had imagined how bad it was. If maybe I should have tried harder, been more patient, stayed. Evidence I could hold in my hands that I was not the problem. 6 months before those voicemails, I had received an email from my Aunt Janet with the subject line, "From your aunt, please read." I had stared at it for 20 minutes before opening. Janet was the quiet one at family gatherings, always present, always pleasant, never disrupting anything. She had watched everything happen to me and had said nothing. I had held that against her for years, almost as much as the rest of it. Her email had no excuses. She told me she was sorry she had stayed silent, that she had been afraid of what my mother did to people who crossed her. Then she told me something that tightened my chest. Grandma Carol's education fund had been handled by a Columbus lawyer named Henderson. Carol's instructions had been clear and specific. My mother had forged my signature, consolidated both accounts, and redirected everything to Paige. Janet knew because she had been a witness on the original documents. She added one more line. My mother was chairing the Claremont Community Fundraiser that spring. The whole town would be there. 2 months after Janet's email, Ellen walked into my office and mentioned that a pastor in a small Ohio town had reached out through our network, looking for a keynote speaker for a community fundraiser. Someone in development, with a personal connection to small-town revitalization. She had recommended me without knowing any of the details. The town was Claremont. I almost said no. The refusal was sitting right on my tongue. And then I thought about Grandma Carol's letter, about that door closing in the snow, about 7 years of being a ghost in a story I had never written. I told Ellen I would do it. Back at my desk, I looked up the fundraiser. Committee Chair, Diane Callahan. Date, March 15th. Venue, the Claremont Community Center on Maple Street. I texted Janet that I was the keynote speaker. Her reply came back in under a minute. She knew. She had not told my mother, and she told me to be ready. I was going back to Claremont, on my own terms, through my own front door, March 15th. I flew into Columbus, rented a car, and drove southeast through flat gray Ohio farmland. Claremont looked smaller than I remembered. The hardware store, the diner, First Methodist with its white steeple above bare trees. Everything exactly the same, which somehow made me feel like I was the one who had changed dimensions. The community center on Maple Street was decorated like the town was throwing a celebration for itself. White tablecloths, rented centerpieces, a banner across the entrance. 200 seats, nearly all filled. I arrived through the speaker entrance on the side of the building. My speaker badge read, Nora Callahan, COO, Westfield and Partners, keynote speaker. Through the doorway, I could see the main hall, and at the center table, in a navy dress with her hair freshly done, greeting guests like she was the host of every room she ever entered. My mother, committee chair, my father beside her, quiet as always, Paige in an outfit she probably couldn't afford. Tyler near the buffet, scrolling his phone. My entire family, 20 feet away, with no idea who was about to take the stage. Pastor James Holden introduced me with the words I had spent 7 years earning. When I stepped out from behind the curtain and walked to the podium, the spotlight hit me, and for 1 second, just one, I was 23 again, standing in a living room while my mother told 14 people I was broken. Then it passed. I looked out at 200 faces, and at the center table, 4 faces I knew better than any others in that room. My mother's smile disappeared. Her hands found the edge of the table and gripped it, knuckles going white against the white linen. Even in shock, her first instinct was audience management. Her eyes moved sideways, scanning the room, checking who was watching her reaction. Some habits run too deep to interrupt. My father set his water glass down hard enough to slosh. Paige's hand went to her chest. Tyler froze mid-chew. The room stood. 200 people. The same neighbors and church members and shopkeepers who had been told for 7 years that I was unstable, who had prayed for me on Sundays and whispered about me at the post office, rose from their chairs and gave me a standing ovation. My mother sat perfectly still, the only person in the room who didn't stand. I delivered my keynote. 20 minutes on community development, grant structures, grassroots organizing, professional, polished, the kind of speech I had given a dozen times at conferences. And then, near the end, I shifted. I told the room I had grown up in a town like this one, that some of them might remember me, that I had left 7 years ago with $200 in a suitcase, not because I wanted to, but because staying was costing me something I couldn't afford to lose. I told them I had been called unstable, that the help I had actually needed was distance, and that the career I had built started because someone in Seattle looked at me and saw a person, not a problem to manage, not a story to tell at church, a person. I paused and let the silence work. Community development, I told them, is not just about grants and infrastructure. It is about seeing people, really seeing them, not the convenient version, not the version that fits someone else's narrative, the actual person standing in front of you. I did not name anyone. I did not look at my mother's table. I didn't have to. Mrs. Harmon, who had taught me English in 10th grade, pressed her hand over her mouth. The man beside her turned slowly toward my mother's table. The whispers started like a match being struck in a dry room. When I finished, the room stood again, longer this time, and some people were wiping their eyes. My mother did not stand. She sat with her napkin clenched in both fists, her face the color of old brick. The networking portion was supposed to be wine and small talk. It became something else. People I hadn't seen in 7 years shook my hand, touched my arm, told me my grandmother would have been so proud. My mother moved through the crowd toward me with a smile so tightly fastened it looked structural. 20 people within earshot. She was not going to make a scene. She was going to perform. Ask me warmly why I hadn't told them I was coming. Present herself as the surprised and delighted mother. I didn't step into it. I told her simply that she had had my number for 7 years. The smile flickered. She dropped her voice and told me I had embarrassed the family, that my speech had been unnecessary. I reminded her evenly that I had not named anyone, and that if people drew conclusions from what I said, that was not my doing. Paige appeared and mentioned the voicemails, the loan, the need. I told her I had listened to all 39 of them and had not heard one apology in the group, just variations on the same request. That was not a family reaching out. That was a collection call. My father materialized behind them, eyes on the floor, asking me quietly not to do this here. I reminded him that he'd had 7 years to choose a different moment. He had not. Tyler arrived last, because Tyler always needed an entrance, and asked if I thought I was better than all of them now. I told him I thought I was done being less than they needed me to be. I straightened my blazer, nodded to Pastor Holden, and walked toward the exit. Steady and even. No running, no slamming. I had done enough of that 7 years ago. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot with the engine off. Through the windows, I could see clusters of people looking toward the door I had just walked through. The Whisper network was running at full speed. By morning, every kitchen table in Claremont would have a new version of Tonight. I called Rachel, told her it was done, that I had said what I needed to say. She asked how I felt. I told her I felt 30 years old for the first time. That night, I wrote one email to my mother, my father, Paige, and Tyler. I told them I was writing at once, that I would not be co-signing any loan, sending money, or funding anyone's business idea, that I was not angry. I was clear, that if any of them wanted a real relationship with me, it did not start with a voicemail asking for help. It started with an honest conversation where someone said what happened out loud and acknowledged it. A real apology, specific, for the fund, for the lies, for 7 years of telling a town I was in a facility when I was building a career. Until that happened, I wished them well, but my answer was no. I read it twice, changed nothing, and pressing send. Then I turned off the light and lay in a hotel bed 3 miles from the town where I grew up, listening to Ohio's silence for the first time in 7 years. No music, no tears, just the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had finally stopped negotiating with people who had never valued the deal. In Claremont, reputation is currency. My mother had just filed for bankruptcy. Within a week of the fundraiser, the narrative Diane Callahan had spent 7 years maintaining came apart the way wet paper comes apart. At the post office, the diner, the pharmacy parking lot, the pews at First Methodist. Every gathering place in a small town became a courtroom, and my mother was on trial in absentia. The people who had accepted her version of me for 7 years were now comparing it to the version they had watched walk across a stage and speak for 20 minutes about building things from nothing, and the two versions did not reconcile. Pastor Holden called my mother personally, gently but finally, and suggested she step back from the committee for a season. She resigned the chair position and told people it was time to focus on family. The irony of that sentence sat in the air like something nobody wanted to touch. My father did something I had not expected. He moved into the guest bedroom. Not a separation, not a divorce, just a door closed between himself and the woman he had enabled for 30 years. Janet heard him one evening through the kitchen window, telling my mother plainly that she had lied about her own daughter, that she had told an entire town that her daughter was broken, and that daughter had stood on a stage and proved her wrong without even saying her name. My mother's response, according to Janet, was that I had turned the whole town against her. My father said she had done that herself 7 years ago, that I had simply shown up. It was the first honest sentence he had spoken in my lifetime. Too late to save us, but maybe not too late to save something of himself. Paige lost the house. Without a cosigner, the loan fell through, the bank completed the foreclosure, and she moved back into our parents' house on Sycamore Drive, into my old room, the one with the nail holes in the wall where I used to hang things. Janet told me this with the careful tone of someone reporting on a collapse without wanting to seem pleased about it. I thought about Paige for a long time after I heard that. Not with satisfaction, or not only with satisfaction. I am human, and I felt a little of it. But mostly, I felt something sadder. Paige had never been given the tools to build anything on her own. Every scaffold in her life had been my mother's construction. The school chosen for her, the fun money spent on her expenses, the social position maintained by keeping me in the role of the difficult one so that Paige could be the easy one. When the scaffolding came down, there was nothing underneath. No resilience, no muscle from struggle. Being the golden child is its own kind of cage. You just don't notice the bars because they're gilded. Tyler's girlfriend, a woman named Dana, saw his Facebook post, the one calling me ungrateful, the one with 41 likes. She packed an overnight bag and told him that publicly shaming his sister for not giving him money was not something she wanted to be connected to. He deleted the post, but the internet remembers what people wish it wouldn't. Screenshots had already moved through Claremont's group texts faster than the town newspaper ever had. A week after the fundraiser, I called Grandma Carol's lawyer, a retired man named Henderson now living outside Columbus. He remembered everything. Carol had come to him specifically because she had not trusted my mother with those accounts. He had kept the original documents for 30 years. When my mother had forged my signature, he had found out too late. The statute of limitations was long expired. He was sorry. The $12,000 was unrecoverable. But I had been thinking about what Carol would have actually wanted. Not restitution, legacy. I contacted the University of Washington Financial Aid Office and established a small annual scholarship from my own salary for students estranged from their families. Students who wrote no family contribution on their financial aid applications, not because their parents couldn't help, but because their parents wouldn't. I named it the Carol Callahan Community Scholarship. The university published the announcement with a photograph. 6-year-old Nora grinning with a gap in her teeth, Grandma Carol's hands on her shoulders, her pearls catching the light. I did not send my family the link, but the internet is public. Let them Google that. My father's letter arrived at my office 6 weeks after the fundraiser, by mail, in a white envelope with his careful, slanted handwriting on the front. He wrote that he didn't know if he had the right to say what he was saying, but that he was sorry, not on behalf of my mother, but for himself, for sitting in that chair and saying nothing, for every time he had told me not to upset my mother when he should have told her to stop. He said he had not been keeping the peace. He had been keeping his comfort. He wrote that I had deserved a father who chose me, and that he hadn't, and that he would carry that. I read it twice, put it in my desk drawer, and did not respond. It was the first apology I had ever received from anyone in the Callahan family, from the person I had expected it from least. 3 months after the fundraiser, Seattle, a Sunday evening in June. I am standing in my kitchen stirring a pot of pasta while Rachel argues with my neighbor David about whether hot sauce belongs on garlic bread, a debate they have approximately every 3 weeks, and neither of them will ever win. Ellen is on my couch with a glass of red wine, telling a story about a grant proposal that went sideways in a spectacular and now funny way. 2 other colleagues are setting my dining table, the one I bought at an estate sale, 6 chairs, oak, scratched and imperfect and entirely mine. This is my Sunday dinner, same people, more or less, every week, no obligation, no performance, no one here because they feel they have to be, everyone here because they chose to show up. I look around the table when we sit down and I think about another table. A longer one, set with better china, in a house in Ohio where I was invisible. This table is smaller, the plates don't match, the wine is $11 a bottle, and I have never felt more seen in my life. Paige reached out 2 months after the fundraiser. Her message was stripped of the performance she usually wore. No breeziness, no strategic warmth. She told me the slideshow had been wrong. She told me she had never defended me and she knew it. She said she didn't know who she was without being the favorite, and that it was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I could have been cruel. I had earned the right. Instead, I told her to find a real therapist, not our mother, not our father, someone who would actually tell her the truth. She said she would. We sat on the phone for another 30 seconds in silence, and then the line went quiet. Small, but real. Tyler sent a one-word text 2 weeks after that. Sorry, no punctuation, no follow-up. I saw it. I haven't responded. I don't know what it costs him to say. I'm letting myself take my time to find out. My mother has not contacted me since the email. I have not contacted her. The door is not locked, but it is not open. It is simply there, waiting for someone to knock with something more substantial than 2 words. My father's letter is in my desk drawer, unanswered. I return to it sometimes, not to reread it, but just to know it is there. Evidence that something in that house finally cracked open, even if it was too late for us. Janet called me the week after the fundraiser, crying before I said hello. She told me she should have spoken years ago. I told her she was saying it now and that counted. That it wasn't enough, but that it was a start. I told her I needed time before we could build anything, and she said she understood, and she has been patient, and that patience is its own kind of apology. She told me what had happened in Claremont in the weeks after the fundraiser, how the town had recalibrated around a different story, how my mother had moved through her usual social spaces and found people responding to her differently. Not with cruelty, just with the quiet, adjusted distance of people who have updated their understanding of someone and have not gone back. The book club relocated, The committee chair was gone. The neighbors who had nodded along for years were nodding along to something different now. None of that was something I had planned or orchestrated. I had filed a police report on myself, essentially, stood in a room and told the truth, and let the natural consequences find their own level. That is all I had done. The rest had taken care of itself. The following Saturday, I drove to the care facility where Grandma Carol had spent her last years. Not to revisit grief, but to sit in the room where she had held my hands and told me the money was mine. To feel the full weight of what she had actually been telling me. Not just the $12,000, everything. My life, my choices, my future, all of it mine to build. I opened the cedar box in my hotel room that night. The pearls, the photograph of 6-year-old me with the gap in my teeth, grinning at a camera in a moment before I understood what any of this would cost. And Carol's letter, folded once, in the careful cursive of a woman who believed penmanship was a form of self-respect. She had written that if I was reading it, it meant I had found the courage to leave. She told me she had wanted to leave her whole life and had been too afraid. She told me not to be like her, not to hold a family together at the cost of myself, that I did not owe anyone my life. I had misread that letter for years. I had thought it was asking me to keep the family together. But she had said that in front of Diane, under Diane's roof, with Diane listening. This letter, hidden, folded into a box she had trusted me to eventually open, was what she had actually meant. She had been too watched to say it out loud, so she had written it down and trusted that I would find it when I was ready. I was ready now. On my desk in Seattle, beside my monitor, I keep two things. The diploma I printed at a FedEx office on a lunch break 7 years ago, in a $12 frame from Target, and the photograph from the cedar box. 6-year-old Nora, gap-toothed, Grandma Carol's hands on her shoulders, both of them grinning into a camera on a day before I understood what any of this would cost. I look at that photograph before difficult meetings, before phone calls I don't want to make, before any moment that asks me to remember who I actually am underneath everything that was built on top of me over the years. I look at it, and I remember that she was right, that the quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the most attention. I had been paying attention my whole life. Eventually, I started paying myself first. Here is what I understand now, at 30 years old, sitting at a table that belongs to me, surrounded by people who chose to be here. The person who calls you unstable when you ask for what is rightfully yours is not describing your instability. They are describing their fear. The person who builds a community narrative around your absence is not protecting family. They are protecting an image. And the space between those two things, between what my family said I was and what I actually was, is where I have spent the last 7 years building a life. I have thought about my mother a great deal since the fundraiser, not with the burning anger I carried for the first few years of leaving. That kind of anger is expensive, and I found better uses for the energy. Something more like the clear-eyed understanding of someone who finally has enough distance to see the full picture. Diane Callahan had spent 60 years being the person who controlled every room she entered. When she could not control me, she did the next best thing. She made me into a story that served her. A story the whole town believed because she told it confidently and nobody checked. She had been so committed to that story and so certain I was nothing that it never occurred to her to Google my name. Not once in 7 years. I think about that sometimes. How easy it is to never question a lie when the truth might make you uncomfortable. How much energy it takes to maintain a false story about another person, and how completely you can be held inside that story without ever having agreed to live there. I didn't agree to it. And the day I walked out of that house with $200 and a cedar box, I stopped letting them write my ending. Paige started therapy. Tyler deleted the post, and something in his silence since feels different from the silence before. Less performed, more genuine, though I am taking my time with that assessment. My father's letter is in my drawer. My mother's absence is what it is. The scholarship in Carol's name has its first recipient this fall. A 20-year-old from a small town in eastern Washington who checked no family contribution on her financial aid forms. Her name is different from mine, and her story is different from mine, but the door she is walking through is the same one I walked through. I hope she finds someone on the other side of it who pulls up a chair and asks what else she sees that is broken. That is what I want to leave you with. Not the story of my family's fall, though I have told it honestly, and I stand behind every word of it. What I want to leave you with is this: you do not need your family's permission to have a life worth living. You only need to stop asking for it. And when the family that abandoned you finally calls, when the voicemails start arriving, when the emails come through, when someone who hasn't thought about you in 7 years suddenly needs something, the bravest thing you can do is listen carefully. Recognize the two words they are saying, understand that those two words are not an apology, and let it ring. 7 years ago, I closed a door quietly in the snow with $200 and nowhere to go. I let it ring, and everything that came after, I built myself. The person who does not call until they need something has already shown you what you are to them. The question is whether you are going to keep picking up, or whether you are going to spend that time building something they will have to Google to believe.